Hello, and welcome to the Illinois LawCast, a podcast about the wisdom, wit, and curiosity of the University of Illinois College of Law. I'm your host, Chris Davies, and in this episode, I will be speaking with our two newest professors, Bill Watson and Sara Gerke, who were both hired this past summer as full-time faculty members. My first interview is with Bill Watson, who comes to Illinois after a stint as a lecturer at Harvard Law School. We talked about his background, his work at the intersection of law and philosophy, and how that has translated to his teaching at Illinois. Professor Watson, thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning of your journey and talk about why you were interested in getting a law degree and what you did early in your career.
Sure. So like many people, my career has been partly a matter of planning, but also it's partly just evolved organically as I found opportunities and people that I wanted to work with. So after law school, I practiced complex commercial litigation with Kirkland & Ellis in their Chicago office. And while I was there for a few years, I worked for a partner who had clerked for Judge Bybee on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I heard a lot about how great of an experience that had been for him. So I decided to apply for a clerkship myself. And I ended up getting a clerkship with Judge Bybee, this same judge. And so I left Kirkland to do the clerkship. And then I took an academic turn and did my PhD in philosophy at Cornell, followed by a 2-year fellowship at Harvard Law School. And then finally I landed here at the University of Illinois College of Law.
So what made you interested in the law to begin with? Where does your passion for this come from?
Well, I loved law school, so much so that I've been trying to get back into law school ever since I left it. And I love learning new areas of the law. As a litigator, my favorite part of the job was being able to continually learn new parts of our law. I mean, our law is so vast that no one can ever know more than just a tiny little piece of it at a time. And so when you're litigating, if your practice is varied and complex, you're constantly needing to learn new legal issues, new parts of the law. And now as a law professor, I just do that, but even more so. A lot of my time is spent researching legal questions that interest me.
And what kind of specialty do you have in the law that you're bringing to the College of Law?
So my training's both in law and in philosophy. I use philosophical tools and concepts to analyze legal issues and issues that lawyers and judges would care about. More specifically, I work on constitutional and statutory interpretation, on how precedent factors into legal reasoning, and on the nature of law, the sort of thing that law is, how we define it, how it relates to morality, and so forth. So those are some of my main areas of research, but methodologically, it's all filtered through a lens of how philosophy can help us understand these issues.
And does that fit well with your interest in the changing of the law and the way that we interact with it?
Oh, well, definitely bears on how judges interpret the law.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my recent work has to do with, for instance, statutory interpretation, taking ideas from philosophy of language and trying to use them to understand how courts interpret statutes or how they should interpret statutes. But your question was, how does it affect our interactions with the law? At that kind of more practical level, I think that the work that I do hopefully speaks to how lawyers present their arguments, and particularly with respect to interpretive issues or issues of how precedent works and how judges will respond to those arguments.
Right, and you recently published an article with the Northwestern University Law Review about precedent and how judges are treating precedent. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's right. The title of the article is Obstructing Precedent. Mm-hmm. It analyzes a recent trend in the Supreme Court's treatment of precedent. Across a broad range of cases, the court seems to be disrespecting or being unfaithful to precedent, but without actually overruling it. So the article has both a descriptive and a normative component. Descriptively, I'm just trying to understand exactly what courts are doing when they seem to disrespect precedent without overruling it. Then from a normative angle, I'm asking whether courts should be doing that. Should they be treating precedent this way? So descriptively, I think what the court has done in many cases is resolve the case at hand in a way that's contrary to how the precedent they're dealing with weighted the various concerns at issue. The court is deciding cases in a way that is inconsistent with the weighting of values or purposes that the precedent employed. Should courts be doing that? Well, in any given case, it's really hard to say. I don't want to suggest that courts should never treat precedent in a way that's disrespectful or unfaithful to it. Sometimes that will be perfectly well justified. But what worries me is the aggressive pattern of treating precedent this way that we've seen in recent years. When the court continually shows that it's weighing the values or purposes underpinning our law differently than its predecessor justices did, it raises questions about the impersonality of the justices' decision making and whether we can trust them to be a comparatively neutral arbiter of some of our most important disagreements.
Yeah. And there's a lot of overlap, obviously, with research you have forthcoming on the debates between originalists and non-originalists, textualists, and purposivists. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's it. I think that there are different ways you could say it, and either is fine. We don't need to get hung up on pronunciation. There are multiple strands to my scholarship. One deals with precedent, another deals with these debates over legal interpretation. So we have these long-running debates between originalists and non-originalists, or between textualists and purposivists. But kind of surprisingly, there remains disagreement even at this kind of more meta level of what the debates even are about. What is it that these different theories disagree over? It could be that they're disagreeing over the linguistic meaning of the texts that are being interpreted, or maybe the effect that those texts have on our law. Or maybe it has more to do with how judges should ascertain what the law is in light of the specific institutional capacities and epistemic limitations that judges face. Or maybe these theories are about how to proceed once the law runs out, how to sort of fill in the gaps after we no longer have clear direction from the law. So these theories could be doing any of those things. And I try to talk about how we should understand theories of interpretation, because that will bear on how we go about justifying them and what sorts of theories we think we should have.
How do you take these scholarship areas that you are interested in and bring it to the classroom in what you're teaching here at the College of Law?
So I always tell students that I have two goals in teaching them. The first and foremost is to train them to be good lawyers. And so that involves teaching them the tools of legal argumentation. And to some extent, my research bears directly on that. But it bears even more directly on the second goal, which is to teach them to think critically about the law, to question how we practice law here and try to imagine how we could do it differently. And so what I try to do in class is offer students concepts or tools that they can use to think critically about our law.
And do you have an example of that from one of your classes?
Sure.
I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Here's an example. I'm writing a book review right now about a book called Law is a Moral Practice. And it's not always clear what the author means by that phrase, law is a moral practice. But one thing he sometimes means is that lawyers have a distinctive form of moral expertise. Lawyers are particularly good at answering moral questions about who should decide certain issues, how past decisions should bear on present ones, how present decisions will affect future incentives and actions. Lawyers may not always agree on how to answer these kinds of moral questions, but in a kind of issue spotting way, our profession is particularly good at identifying these moral questions that need to be answered. So that idea that lawyers have a distinctive form of moral expertise is something that I say explicitly to my students, and that I try to bring out in the way I teach them. That I'm trying to allow them to practice answering these kinds of moral questions that lawyers are particularly good at identifying. And so that's part of what we do in the class. And all law professors do that, but I try to do it in a conscious and explicit way so that students know that there's a moral component to what I'm teaching them.
Okay. That sounds very interesting. And how are you enjoying your time here so far? It's your first semester as a professor. This is your first professorship as well?
That's right. Yeah. Before this, I was just a fellow teaching legal research and writing. And now I'm teaching a large 1L class on constitutional law for the first time. And that's been an enormous amount of work, more than I expected, but it's fun work. It's work that I genuinely enjoy doing. And so it's been great to interact with the students. They're really engaged in the course. They ask great questions. They're always excited to talk after class or during office hours. And so being able to engage with them and teach them a subject that I really care about and find interesting has been a lot of fun.
Is there anything that has been particularly surprising about the job?
I don't know if there's been anything surprising. No, I'd say nothing surprising that comes to mind immediately anyways.
You mentioned that you started your career in law in Chicago. Were you familiar with Illinois at all before coming here?
I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota originally. Then went to the University of Chicago for law school and decided to stay and practice in Chicago. So the Midwest is home for me, and being here in a college town in the Midwest is a wonderful place to be, and I'm really enjoying it so far.
Yeah. Is there anything else that people should know about Bill Watson, the person, not just the professor?
Well, outside of teaching, I spend a lot of time with my 3-year-old son. We go to Meadowbrook Park in Urbana and see the playground there, or walk around. I enjoy running, reading fiction in the limited time that I have outside of either work or parenting. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast and here at Illinois Law.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Bill Watson for his time and for sharing a bit about himself. My second interview is with Sara Gerke. A prolific researcher, Professor Gerke has published more than 60 articles, primarily about the ethical and legal challenges of artificial intelligence and big data for healthcare and health law. She shared more about the work she is doing and her background in our interview. Sara Gerke, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to Illinois Law? I know you've got an interesting background going back to Germany.
Yes. So I just joined the faculty this summer. So I'm one of the newest faculty members at the College of Law. And I was an assistant professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law before. I joined the faculty here for 3 years. Now I'm an associate professor of law. And before that, I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Law School for 3 years. And before that, I lived in Germany. So I'm here in the US now since around 6.5 years. And before that, I worked at an Institute for Medical Law and Ethics in Germany. Was a general manager there of that institute, and I was very excited about a project which was offered at Harvard Law School on AI, and so I applied for it and was lucky to get it, and then I loved the academic environment here so much, so I stayed on.
What made you want to pursue a law degree and then a career in law?
Yeah, so actually, when you have to decide to study law in Germany, because in Germany you are studying for almost 6 years law, so you are studying, you're very young when you have to decide what to study. And so for me, it was really, I want to make the world a better place and want to bring more justice to the world. And I think like law is really a powerful tool, and so you can really use it to influence and change the law where it's needed, but also really to try to wisely make the world a better place.
Yeah, and you wanted to be a judge when you were first getting started?
Yes, exactly. So at the very beginning, when I had no idea about law school yet, I thought, well, I would like to become a judge because I can make decisions. But I pretty quickly during law school realized, well, maybe that's not what I want, because that also means, though there's some discretion, of course, you still need to apply the law. And what is if I feel that might be an unfair provision, or maybe and so at some point I felt, for me, it was very clear at some point that I need to pursue the academic career, because I felt I need to develop and move the law further rather than applying it.
And you mentioned you've got this interest in AI.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell me a little bit more about your specialty and what drew that to you?
Yes, so my background is a health law scholar. I also studied medical ethics, so I'm also a bioethicist, and so that's where I'm coming literally from. But I have been specialized, and most of my time I'm spending the last 6 years now on AI and digital health, and probably this will continue the next decade, because it is probably the most challenging task which we are facing, not just in society and in general, in all of the fields. AI is all around us, but also in particular in the healthcare field. And so the last six years, I have been specializing in it. So I was one with some of my wonderful colleagues at Harvard Law School, but also in Michigan, University of Copenhagen, and University of Cambridge. We had this huge project which was looking at some of the ethical and legal questions in the bioscience field. But my project at Harvard Law School was specifically on AI. And so we were one of the first people really looking at some of those issues. And it still continues. I think we just started to scratch like the surfaces of all of the problems. And so we still have a lot to go, and which we need to address to be able to safely and effectively implement those tools into the healthcare system and into hospitals.
Is the fact that artificial intelligence is so new, so groundbreaking, and there's not much experience with it in the legal field and everywhere, is that something that draws you to it?
I think like there are several things. I think I see the potential of AI. So I think we can improve healthcare with AI if we do it right. Though, of course, there are a lot of like issues here which we need to address. So that's going to be challenging. I also like that I can analyze the law, the current regulatory framework, see, okay, do they fit? Are there any ethical or legal challenges? Do we need a new framework? And literally exactly what we were talking about, thinking about, okay, how do we develop law? What needs to be fixed? And I like to make policy recommendation to regulators like the FDA. And luckily, FDA has already cited some of my papers. So I'm happy that regulators are reading my work.
Yeah, that's excellent. Can you tell me a little bit more about some specific works that you've done recently or that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, so I'm very busy. I'm always working, having lots of projects at the same time. And most of them right now are on all kind of legal, ethical issues and challenges which are raised by medical AI, so AI in healthcare. And they usually fall into one of 3 or 4 buckets. Like one big bucket is regulation. How do we regulate those tools? And I do a lot of comparative law between the US and the EU. We have in the EU right now the new AI Act. In the US, I do mostly FDA law and looking at the comparison. The other big bucket is liability questions. What happens if we are implementing those tools in the surgery room or in the hospital? Who's going to be held liable if harm occurs to a patient? And I'm also doing a lot of comparison between new proposed developments in Europe and also our TOT system in the US. And then I would say there's a third bucket, which is data privacy questions. And again, the US has a very different approach to the EU. And then, of course, there are all kind of like ethical issues when it comes to justice, allocation, bias in AI. So these are like all of my different buckets where I am usually having a paper here or there and researching on. I do also have projects which I'm running. 2 are funded by the European Union. 1 is funded by the NIH. All of them are on AI, medical AI. So there's one where I'm leading the study on the ethical and legal challenges of AI-assisted surgery. So this is the project is called Classica. We also have a website. And I mostly work with surgeons in this project. So the surgeons, there's also a startup involved. They have developed an AI tool. We are currently in clinical trials and testing the AI tool. And from my perspective, I am really there as a researcher. I'm not a lawyer for legal compliance, but I'm really the researcher looking at what are some of the legal issues here. And my team mainly focuses on questions of liability if those AI tools are going to be integrated into the surgery room. And I have another project which is called Opera that's also from the European Union. And that's mainly with gastroenterologists. Again, I'm leading the ethics and the legal part here in this project with 2 medical colleagues. And there are also all types of difficult questions from data privacy to other regulatory questions, which we need to consider. And again, this is also a project which is in clinical trials. And then I have a project which is funded by the NIH that looks at all kind of different regulatory questions of bioprinting, bionics, and also like robotics. So that's also another project where we do a lot of empirical studies. We are currently carrying out like interviews and finishing that project up. So it keeps me all of my projects keep me very busy, but it's also fantastic because they are all interdisciplinary. I'm often the only lawyer in the room, and I learn a lot from my colleagues in the different fields. So I enjoy it very much.
Yeah, it sounds like a very busy workload for sure. You also teach here at the University of Illinois. How does your research and all the different buckets of things that you're interested in, how does that feed into what you teach here?
Yeah, so I'm teaching this semester is literally a lot of what I'm doing in my research. I'm teaching FDA law. And I do a lot on regulation because AI can be considered a medical device under some conditions. There are some exceptions. So I'm teaching FDA law and I also teach health law. So that's literally all my expertise right now. And next spring semester, I'm going to teach torts. And I'm doing a lot on liability law because that's very relevant for AI. So I'm very lucky that I can here and there teach my students about what I'm doing. And they are very excited about the work. And I've also just hired several students as research assistants so that I can get some assistance from them, but also to give them the opportunity to be part of such excellent projects.
Yeah, and we're coming up on the end of your first semester here. How are you liking the university and Illinois in general?
No, I love it so far. I think it's excellent. My students are amazing. They are very interested in what I'm doing and my research. They're always asking questions. And I also love the research environment here. It's a very interdisciplinary focused campus, which is very great for my type of research because I'm doing a lot of grant work and my colleagues are also all fantastic. So I cannot complain.
That's good. Outside of the professor, what should people know about you and the things that make you who you are?
Yeah, well, I need to say, like, my work is who I am. It keeps me very busy. Every time I enjoy just watching a movie or dance Zumba. I also, just doing some cooking. I like to bake German bread. And I love the season, Christmas season. So we are right now in the Christmas season. So I'm looking forward for Christmas. It's my favorite holiday. Maybe because I'm German, but yeah. So I love to. I have a lot of Christmas decoration at home, all my nutcrackers, and so. Yeah, maybe that's.
Any good Christmas baking that you do, or?
Not necessarily. No. I'm not something like special. Okay. There is like the typically very famous German Stollen, but I have to say I need to buy it in Germany. There are some very special shops where you can get it better. It's hard to make yourself.
Great. Well, Professor Gerke, thank you very much for your time and all that you've brought to Illinois. I hope you enjoy it here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again to Sara Gerke for taking time from her busy schedule to do the podcast. Thank you to our listeners as well for making the Illinois LawCast a part of your day. If you have any comments or suggestions for the podcast, please email podcast@law.illinois.edu and subscribe to the Illinois LawCast on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. This episode was recorded, mixed, and edited by me, Chris Davies. Special thanks to Kelly Moss for our album art and other graphics, and Krista Getke for her help in the editing process. Until next time, thanks again for listening to the Illinois LawCast.